The air should have smelled of money and champagne. In the Adeyemi Gallery, where pristine white walls celebrated masterpieces, it was the only scent permitted. But tonight, all Dr. Bayo Adeyemi could smell was the damp clay of a tomb. Alone in the main gallery before showtime, his fingers glided along the cold surface of the River Goddess's Lament, the bronze sculpture that would be the star of the auction. The press called it a masterpiece, collectors called it a fortune, Dr. Adeyemi called it a lie. And then it came. Not a feeling, but a jolt. A toxic current shot up his arm, pierced his chest, and seized his heart. He recoiled, his breath catching, his eyes locked on the statue. Decades of experience told him that some art carried history, but this piece, it carried something else. It carried a hunger. From the second-floor balcony, he saw Femi Alakija, its owner, standing in the middle of the reception hall. The golden boy of Nigerian tech was laughing, the smile of a young king unaware that his kingdom was about to crumble. And beside him, Zainab, his fiancée, unrealistically beautiful, a living masterpiece more vibrant than anything hanging on the walls. She was the one who had found the statue. She was the one who had convinced Femi to buy it. Looking at them, then back at the silent block of metal in the room, Dr. Adeyemi suddenly understood everything. The statue wasn't a work of art. It was a cage. A perfectly designed machine to devour the light and life of Femi Alakija. And when he saw Zainab's hand rest lightly on Femi's arm, a loving gesture admired by the whole world, he knew the horror wasn't in the bronze. It was in the woman who brought the bronze here. And the machine had already begun to run. The toxic jolt passed, leaving a cold, deep pit in Dr. Bayo Adeyemi's chest. He gripped the ebony balcony railing, taking a deep breath to calm his racing heart. The air, which should have smelled of champagne and the expensive perfumes of the guests below, now felt thick with the taste of metal and deceit. His eyes did not leave the golden couple who were the center of the universe below. Femi Alakija, in a perfectly tailored suit, was beaming. It was the smile of a man who had conquered the world, a young king of the digital age who turned lines of code into pure gold. He was telling a joke, and the tycoons, the politicians surrounding him all laughed along, sycophantic laughter. But Femi didn't mind. His eyes were only for one person, Zainab. She stood beside him, an embodiment of elegance. An emerald silk dress hugged her form, and her smile could light up the entire room. She listened to Femi speak, tilting her head gracefully, occasionally raising a hand to fix a stray strand of hair. A perfect gesture, too perfect. Dr. Adeyemi narrowed his eyes. He had spent his life studying art, and he knew a masterpiece when he saw one. But he also knew a sophisticated forgery. And Zainab, with every carefully calculated gesture, looked more like a copy than a human being. He remembered the day she first walked into this gallery, about 3 months ago. She wasn't with Femi. She came alone, carrying high-resolution photos of the River Goddess's Lament. She said it belonged to a private collection in Belgium, and that she was acting as an intermediary for a potential client. Her voice was as smooth as velvet, her knowledge of 19th-century African art surprisingly profound. "It has a tragic story," she had explained, her brown eyes sparkling. "It's said the artist created it after losing his only daughter on the Niger River. He sculpted this statue as a lament, a plea to the river goddess to protect other children." At the time, Dr. Adeyemi had been captivated by the story. But something didn't add up. A small detail in her narrative. She said the artist was of the Yoruba tribe, but the sculptural details on the goddess's crown were distinctly in the style of the Benin Kingdom, a contradiction that only a leading expert could recognize. When he pointed it out, she just smiled. Perhaps he was inspired by his neighbors, Dr. Art knows no borders, does it? The answer was too smooth, too quick. 2 weeks later, Femi Alakija, a regular client of the gallery, had called him in a state of utter excitement. He was about to propose to his girlfriend, Zainab, and he wanted to buy a special gift. Zainab had coincidentally found a masterpiece, the River Goddess's Lament, and Femi wanted Dr. Adeyemi to authenticate it and sponsor its display in the upcoming charity auction. "This is how I'll introduce her to the world, Doctor," Femi had said over the phone. his voice filled with love. "I want everyone to see how wonderful she is." When the actual statue arrived, Dr. Adeyemi's unease grew. It was packed in a steel-reinforced wooden crate, sealed with strange wax seals he had never seen before. And when he and his team opened it, a cold, damp air emanated, despite the blazing Lagos heat outside. The statue was hauntingly beautiful. The bronze figure of a woman reached upward, her empty eyes staring into the void, her mouth slightly open as if in a silent scream. It was truly a masterpiece. But when he examined it alone that night, under the light of a single lamp, he found them. Under the base, so exquisitely carved that they almost blended into the green patina of time, were symbols. They were not writing. They were sharp, angular engravings, like scorpions, coiling, and snakes biting their own tails. It was not the artist's signature. It was not a royal mark. It was something much older and more sinister. He spent 2 days in his private library, a room filled with rare, dust-covered books of history. He found a reference in a French anthropological journal from the 1922. It spoke of a secret society, or a criminal organization, called the Esu Society. They didn't kill with knives or guns, they killed with art. They would find hosts' artifacts with a tragic history and brand them with blood-soaked rituals. Then, they would introduce these items into the lives of wealthy, powerful men on the rise. The artifact, like a parasite, would slowly drain the victim's luck, health, and eventually, their life. When the victim collapsed, the Esu Society would emerge from the shadows to reclaim the host along with the entire fortune of the deceased. Dr. Adeyemi shuddered as he recalled those lines. And the machine had already begun to run. He returned to the present. Down in the hall, a journalist was interviewing Zainab. "Miss Zainab, how does it feel to have recovered such a national treasure?" Zainab smiled gracefully for the camera. "I didn't find it. I think it found me." Sometimes, the most beautiful works of art choose their owners. And I knew, from the very first moment, that it belonged to Femi. Those words, romantic on the surface, held a gruesome meaning for Dr. Adeyemi. The artwork chooses its owner. The parasite chooses its host. He had to do something. But what? Scream that the fiancée of the most powerful man in Lagos was a predator and his treasure was a cursed weapon. They would think he was mad. His career, the reputation he had built his whole life, would turn to dust. Just then, the auctioneer stepped onto the stage. A dapper Englishman with a posh accent, hired specially for the event. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, and the room slowly fell silent. "We've had a wonderful evening with some outstanding contemporary art. But now, it is time for the main event. A moment of history. A treasure returned home." The lights in the room dimmed, leaving only a single spotlight on the stage, where 2 staff members were carefully wheeling the river goddess's lament to the center. It stood there, silent and majestic, drawing all eyes. In the hall, Femi stood tall with pride, his arm around Zainab's waist, giving it a gentle squeeze. Zainab rested her head on his shoulder, her smile now, with no cameras pointed at her, looking different. It was no longer warm. It was cold, sharp, and full of triumph. Dr. Adeyemi felt the blood freeze in his veins. He had no more time. He had to choose his reputation or the life of the young man below. And now, the auctioneer boomed, raising his wooden gavel. "We will begin the bidding for the river goddess's lament." Dr. Adeyemi turned and rushed towards the stairs. The auctioneer's wooden gavel came down, sharp and decisive, like the starting gun for an execution. "The opening bid is 500 million naira." The crowd buzzed. A few whistles of admiration. Femi squeezed Zainab's hand, his eyes sparkling with pride. But Dr. Adeyemi heard nothing. The only sound in his head was the blood pounding in his ears. He descended the stairs, not running, but with quick, purposeful strides, a sense of urgency hidden beneath a calm exterior. Each step was a tick of a time bomb. He swept past familiar faces: a senator, an oil magnate, a Nollywood star, but his gaze was fixed on one person, Jide, the head of security for the gallery. A tall, taciturn man who had worked for him for 15 years. Jide understood him beyond words. With just a slight nod, a narrowing of the eyes, Jide understood. He detached himself from the wall, where he was standing, and moved silently but swiftly towards the stage. 600 million. A voice called out from the front row. Jide was beside the auctioneer. He leaned into the Englishman's ear and whispered something. Very brief. The auctioneer's face transformed from excitement to confusion, then quickly regained its professional veneer. He tapped the gavel lightly again, but this time it was to call for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice slightly strained. We will be pausing the auction for a moment. There has been a request for an unscheduled security verification of the artifact. Please remain in your seats. We will be back in a few minutes. A wave of whispers spread through the room. Journalists' cameras immediately panned towards the statue. Femi turned around, frowning, looking for Dr. Adeyemi. He saw him approaching, and his annoyance softened into curiosity. Doctor, what's going on? Femi asked as he drew near. Security verification? I thought we had done all that? Just one final procedure. Femi, Dr. Adeyemi said, his voice low and steady. He wasn't looking at Femi. He was looking directly at Zainab, and he saw it. For just a millisecond, before she could put her mask of concern back on, a look as cold as ice flashed in her eyes. It wasn't confusion or worry. It was anger. The pure, lethal anger of a predator whose path has been blocked. Is there a problem with the piece, Doctor? Zainab asked, her voice artificially sweet. Is everything all right? She placed a hand on her chest, a gesture of wounded innocence. Everything will be all right, Doctor. Adeyemi replied, emphasizing the word will. But I need to speak with you two privately. In my office. Right now. Femi looked hesitant. Right now. The whole room is waiting. Can't it wait? No, Dr. Adeyemi said firmly. The urgency in his voice finally cut through Femi's fog of love and excitement. He saw the true gravity on the face of his mentor, his family's dear friend. All right, Femi said, and turned to Zainab. Let's go, darling. It should only take a few minutes. He took her hand, but this time, Dr. Adeyemi noticed, Zainab's hand was ice cold. She let Femi lead her away, but every step she took up the stairs had an invisible resistance. She was walking towards the doctor's office, but her whole body seemed to be screaming to run in the opposite direction. They walked past the curious guests who watched them go. Dr. Adeyemi could hear the whispers behind them. What's wrong with the statue? Look at Zainab's face. She doesn't look happy. Finally, they reached the second-floor corridor leading to his private office. Jide was already waiting there. He nodded to Dr. Adeyemi, his eyes saying the area is secure. The doctor opened the heavy oak door and gestured for the couple to enter. His office was another world. Outside was glamour and noise. Inside was the stillness of knowledge. The walls were covered with books from floor to ceiling, the air filled with the faint scent of old paper and leather. The only light came from a green desk lamp, casting its glow on a tidy wooden desk. Femi entered, his confusion evident. Zainab followed, pausing at the threshold, hesitant. Come in, Zainab, Dr. Adeyemi said, his tone no longer soft. She stepped inside, and he closed the door. A heavy thunk echoed as the lock engaged. The sounds of the party were instantly cut off. They were enveloped in an almost absolute silence. The silence of an interrogation room. The silence in Dr. Adeyemi's office was heavy, almost palpable. Femi was the first to break it, his confusion now turning to frustration. Doctor, what the hell is going on? He demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet room. You slam the door, cancel the auction, and look at us like we're criminals. You're scaring people, including me. Dr. Adeyemi didn't answer Femi. His gaze remained locked on Zainab, who stood motionless near the door, like an antelope that suddenly realizes it has stepped into a lion's territory. Zainab, he began, his voice still frighteningly calm. The first time you came here, you said you found the statue through a broker in Belgium. What was his name? Zainab blinked, clearly taken aback by the direct question. His name was Luke Vermeer, an older gentleman. Luke Vermeer, Dr. Adeyemi repeated, nodding slowly. Interesting, because I have very good connections in the European art world, and no one has ever heard of that name. Furthermore, you said the artist was Yoruba, but the goddess's crown is in the Benin style. You're an expert, Zainab. Such a basic error. How could you have missed it? Zainab let out a short, forced laugh, a sound of pained effort. Are you testing my knowledge? Right now? I don't understand what you're implying. It's an authenticated piece. It has all the papers. She turned to Femi, her eyes wide, feigning hurt. Femi, say something. I feel like I'm being put on trial. As expected, Femi immediately played the protector. He stepped forward to stand in front of Zainab, facing his mentor. Easy, doctor. There must be some mistake. Maybe Zainab misremembered the name, or there are historical details we don't know about. She worked very hard to get this piece for me. Whatever its exact history is, it's still beautiful. Dr. Adeyemi sighed, a sigh filled with disappointment. Femi still didn't get it. He was still looking at the frame, not the rotting picture inside. Beauty is not the issue here, Femi, he said, his voice hardening. The truth is, he turned his back to them, walked to his desk, and opened a leather-bound file. He pulled out a few sheets of paper and placed them on the polished wooden surface. It was the provenance documentation Zainab had provided. These are the documents you gave me, he said, without looking up. They look very convincing. The wax seals, the signatures, all perfect. He looked up, and this time, his eyes were no longer questioning, but filled with cold certainty. This signature, he pointed to a flowing script at the bottom of the page, of an appraiser named Jean-Luc Dubois. I called him in Paris 2 days ago. He retired in 2018 and is now tending his vineyard in Provence. He says he has never seen this piece in his life. He paused, letting the truth sink into the air. This signature is a forgery. The room seemed to shrink. Femi froze, looking from the paper to Zainab's face as if seeing her for the first time. Zainab's confidence began to crumble. How dare you? She stammered, shifting from defense to attack. You investigated behind our backs? You have no right. This is an insult. I have every right when the safety of this gallery and of those I consider family is threatened. Dr. Adeyemi roared, his composure finally shattering, revealing the righteous fury beneath. He strode to a blank wall covered by a velvet curtain. He yanked the curtain aside, revealing a large digital screen. With a few taps on his tablet, the screen lit up. An image appeared. It was a close-up, ultra-high-resolution photo of the base of the river goddess's lament. And there, magnified 100 times, were the deadly symbols. The engravings of coiled scorpions and intertwined snakes, sharp and malicious. Femi unconsciously took a step back. What is that? Dr. Adeyemi didn't answer him. He only looked at Zainab, whose face was now as white as a sheet. I won't ask you about a fake signature again, Zainab, he said, his voice dropping to a haunting whisper. Tell me about these. They don't belong to the artist. They are not in any historical records. They are the mark of the Esu society. The name hung in the air, heavy and toxic. He took a step closer to her, his old eyes piercing through every layer of her constructed facade. Do you know them? Silence descended. It was not a normal silence. It was the silence of a sprung trap. All the color drained from Zainab's face. Her lips moved but no sound came out. The perfect mask of grace, intellect, and love didn't just crack, it disintegrated into ash. All that was left was raw, primal terror. Femi's head whipped back and forth between the gruesome image on the screen and the devastated face of the woman he loved. The pieces began to click into place in his mind, forming a picture he never wanted to see. The small lies, the inconsistent stories, the coldness he sometimes felt when he held her. It all now made a horrible kind of sense. The room was plunged into a dead silence, waiting for an explosion. Faced with irrefutable evidence and Dr. Adeyemi's steel-like gaze, Zainab's world collapsed. But a master predator never gives up. When one tactic fails, it immediately switches to another. The dead silence was broken by a choked sob. Zainab crumpled to the floor. Not a gentle fall, but a complete collapse. Her body curled up on the expensive Persian rug, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was a performance of brokenness, a tragic tableau of despair. "Don't, please don't," she whispered between sobs, her hands covering her head as if trying to stop her mind from shattering. Femi, instinctively, rushed towards her. "Zainab, stop, doctor." Adeyemi's voice rang out, not loud but full of authority, stopping Femi in his tracks. "Just let her talk." Zainab lifted her tear-streaked face. Her mascara had run, creating black streaks on her perfect skin, making her look even more fragile, more pitiful. The Esu Society," she stammered, her voice hoarse with fear. "They have my family. They have my little brother in Kaduna." She began to tell her story, a tale expertly woven from truth and lies. She claimed to have been an ambitious art researcher who accidentally uncovered the Esu Society's money laundering operations while working on her thesis in Europe. Instead of killing her, they saw her value her knowledge, her beauty, her sophistication. They turned her into a tool. They threatened to harm her family if she didn't obey. "I'm just their pawn, doctor," she sobbed, looking at him with pleading eyes. "They chose Femi. They knew he was a rising star, a perfect target. They gave me the mission to get close to him, win his trust, and finally, bring the lament into his life." Then, she turned to Femi, and this was the decisive moment. Her eyes were filled with a grief that seemed heartbreakingly real. "But there was one thing I didn't count on. I fell in love with you, Femi. Truly in love. Every moment we were together, every smile, every promise. For me, it was real." She reached out a hand towards him, a desperate gesture. "I tried to delay. I created small problems in the contract. I deliberately chose a non-existent broker hoping Dr. Adeyemi would find out. I planted clues. I was hoping someone would be smart enough to see, to save us. I was too scared to speak up myself. They have eyes everywhere." Femi was in turmoil. The rage and sense of betrayal within him now wrestled with a new emotion. Pity. The woman he loved, the one who had deceived him, was now painting herself as a victim, a tragic heroine trapped in an impossible situation. His heart screamed to believe her. He wanted to rush to her, hold her, and tell her he would protect her from everything. "Zainab, is it true?" he asked, his voice trembling. But Dr. Adeyemi was not moved. Tears were the oldest weapon, and he was immune. "A very moving story," he said, his voice ice-cold. "A perfect tragedy. But if you want us to believe you, give us details. Verifiable details. What was the exact plan? What were they going to do to Femi after he officially owned the statue?" He moved closer, crouching to her eye level. "And the curse or whatever is carved under the base, how is it activated?" Zainab hesitated. This was a question she hadn't prepared for. She opened her mouth to speak. Bam! The office door burst open. Jaid, the head of security, rushed in, his face pale with panic, shattering the tense bubble in the room. He paid no attention to Zainab kneeling on the floor or the stunned Femi. He spoke directly to Dr. Adeyemi. "Doctor, we have a serious problem," Jaid panted. "The man in the grey suit near the bar, the one you asked me to watch, has vanished from the reception hall." Dr. Adeyemi stood up straight. That was the man he'd seen Zainab glance at earlier. An inside man. Jaid swallowed hard and continued. "And it's worse. The security system in the vault area in the basement, it's just been disabled. The silent alarm was triggered. Someone has broken in from the inside. The vault. It held dozens of unexhibited artworks worth billions of naira. But Dr. Adeyemi knew the intruder wasn't after those. His eyes met Jaid's, and they shared the same horrifying thought. Zainab, hearing the news, also looked up, the fear in her eyes now real. The trap wasn't just the statue. The trap was the entire gallery, and it had just been sprung. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Jide's news was like a pulled-pin grenade rolling in among them. The silence was stretched taut. Dr. Adeyemi was the first to act. His entire scholarly, pensive demeanor vanished, replaced by the cold decisiveness of a general on a battlefield. "Jide," he commanded, his voice sharp and clear. "Lock down the entire building. Immediately. No one in, no one out. Inform your team via radio. Tell them we have a level 1 intrusion. Activate the labyrinth protocol." "Yes, sir," Jide replied, his hand already on his radio. "Activating labyrinth." Femi looked at him, bewildered. "The labyrinth protocol? What's that?" "A security system I designed, Doctor." Adeyemi explained briefly, his eyes scanning the small security monitors on his desk. "It will lock and seal corridors in a random sequence, turning this gallery into a literal maze to trap anyone who doesn't belong here." As he spoke, heavy metallic clunks began to echo from afar, as steel security doors unseen by visitors slammed shut, partitioning the building into isolated zones. "He got into the vault, Doctor," Adeyemi muttered, his mind working at lightning speed. "But why? He can't carry a large piece out with the building on lockdown. What does he want down there?" He suddenly turned to Jide. "Besides the artwork, what else is in the vault?" Jide frowned in thought. "Archives, restoration supplies, and, oh God, the server room. The server room, Doctor," Adeyemi repeated, and a horrifying realization dawned on his face. "It controls everything. The power grid, the camera system, the security doors." His eyes widened. "And the fire suppression system, the halon gas system," Femi whispered, his face pale. As a tech guy, he understood. Halon gas could extinguish a fire in seconds by displacing all the oxygen in the air. And it could also kill a person in that same amount of time. Their plan was now clear as day. The intruder hadn't come to steal. He had come to seize control of the entire building. He would trigger the halon system in the main hall, where hundreds of guests were still waiting impatiently. A tragic accident, a catastrophic security system malfunction. Hundreds dead, including Femi Alakija, the young tech star who had just bought an unlucky ancient statue. Everything would be perfectly covered up. The Esu society would leave no trace. Hearing this, Zainab let out a choked cry. "No," she shook her head, violently, genuine terror now evident in her eyes. "No, that wasn't the plan. They told me. They only wanted Femi. They said it would look like a heart attack. They stress-induced collapse." Her unintentional confession hung in the air, confirming everything. She was part of the plan, but only a pawn, unaware of the true scale of this deadly endgame. Jide's radio crackled. "Sir, it's me." He's locked himself in the server room. He's trying to override our entire system. I'm losing control of the cameras. "How much time do you have?" Dr. Adeyemi demanded. 10 minutes. 10 minutes max before he has full control of everything, including the halon gas system. 10 minutes. They were trapped in this office. A killer was in the server room, about to hold the lives of hundreds of people in his hands. And the crowd below was still oblivious, still sipping champagne and complaining about the delay. A sense of helplessness and rage erupted in Femi. He was no longer the deceived, lovesick young man. He was an engineer, a problem solver, and now, the lives of everyone, including the woman who had betrayed him, were on the line. He looked at the blinking building schematic on the security monitor, then at Zainab huddled on the floor, and finally at Dr. Adeyemi. The fear in his eyes was replaced by an iron will. "What's the fastest way there?" he asked, his voice resolute. "The main corridors are blocked by the labyrinth protocol. There has to be another way. This is your gallery. There must be a secret passage." Dr. Adeyemi looked at Femi, a flicker of pride in his eyes. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly turned and looked towards a massive bookshelf, filled with ancient leather-bound volumes, in the far corner of the room. "There is a way," he said, "but it's not for the faint of heart." Dr. Adeyemi didn't waste a second. He walked to the bookshelf, his eyes scanning the old leather spines, His hand, without hesitation, pulled out a thick volume titled, The Lost Kingdoms of West Africa. He didn't open it. Instead, he pushed the book deep inside. A dry crack echoed, and an entire section of the bookshelf, about 2 meters wide, receded into the darkness and then swiveled sideways, revealing a narrow, dark, and dusty passage. A cold draft, carrying the smell of concrete and forgotten time, flowed into the office. "Hurry," Dr. Adeyemi urged, already holding a powerful flashlight from his desk drawer. "We don't have much time." He stepped into the darkness first. Femi didn't hesitate. He turned and grabbed Zainab's arm. His grip had no gentleness left in it. It was as hard as steel. "You're coming with us." "No, Zainab tried to pull away. Her eyes panicked. "I can't." "You don't have a choice," Femi growled, his voice cold. "You started this. Now you're going to help us finish it." He pulled her along, practically dragging her into the secret passage. Jide stood at the door, giving them one last nod before the bookshelf section slowly swiveled back, trapping them in the dark. The thud of the mechanism, locking behind them, sounded like a prison door slamming shut. They were in a narrow service corridor, wide enough for one person. Tangled pipes and cables ran along both walls. The only light came from the beam of Dr. Adeyemi's flashlight, cutting a trembling swathe through the darkness. "This is a maintenance passage, built at the same time as the building," the doctor explained, his voice echoing. "It connects my office to all critical areas, including the vault." They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps the only noise. Jide's radio began to crackle. "Sir, signal is weak. I see him trying to bypass the final firewall." Then there was only static. They were completely alone. The oppressive silence and darkness seemed to have their own effect. It stripped away all pretense, all facades. Femi, walking right behind Zainab, suddenly stopped, causing her to bump into his back. He turned around in the cramped space. The flashlight beam from ahead illuminated half his face, creating fearsome shadows. "Your family," Femi whispered, his voice hoarse with anger. "Your brother in Kaduna. Is it true? Tell me the truth. No more tears. No more lies." Zainab was silent. She just stood there, trembling in the dark. "Speak," Femi roared, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. In this claustrophobic, suffocating space, she finally broke. It wasn't an act anymore. This was the naked truth. "There's no one," she said, her voice empty. "No family, no brother. I was an orphan, picked up by the Esu Society from a slum in Onitsha when I was 15. Femi was stunned into silence. "They're the only family I've ever known," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "They fed me. They educated me, sent me to the best schools in Europe. They taught me about art, how to speak, how to walk, how to seduce. They created me. Everything about me was made by them. I owe them everything." Femi's rage dissipated, leaving only a cold, empty sadness. The woman he loved hadn't just deceived him. She had never existed. He had been in love with a ghost, an elaborately constructed role. Dr. Adeyemi, who had heard everything from up ahead, didn't miss the opportunity. "Activation," he called back, his voice unchanged. What was their plan? How do they activate the curse? "It's not a curse." Zainab let out a bitter laugh. "It's worse than that. It's more practical." She took a breath. "The statue is just a conduit, a decoy, a symbol to distract. The real weapon is digital." Femi frowned. "Digital?" "The man in the server room isn't just there to turn on the gas system. That's just plan B, to eliminate all witnesses. His main mission is to upload something. An extremely sophisticated computer virus. It's hidden in a single audio file." "An audio file?" "It's disguised as a piece of the statue's history. An ancient lullaby, supposedly from the tribe that created the piece. The river goddess's lullaby," Zainab whispered, and the name sent a chill down Femi's spine. The original plan was that after the successful auction, during a private celebration, this audio file would be discovered and played as a way to honor the piece. The moment that song is played on any device connected to Femi's network, the virus activates. Within 60 seconds, it would wipe everything. Your company servers, bank accounts, personal data, all of it would be turned into digital ash. You would lose everything. They had reached the end of the corridor. Dr. Adeyemi signaled for them to be quiet. Ahead was a metal ventilation grill. He carefully peered through it. They were right behind the wall of the server room. Through the grill, they could see the intruder. A man in a technician's uniform, his back to them. He was sitting in front of a bank of blinking servers, his fingers flying across a keyboard. On his laptop screen, a progress bar was running. 92%. 93%. And then they heard it. A soft, haunting melody, coming from the technician's laptop speakers. The melody of a lullaby. He was testing the file. He was playing the song. The virus upload was about to complete. Their time was up. 95%. 96%. The progress bar on the laptop screen was like a burning fuse on a bomb. The haunting melody of the lullaby filled the space, each note a nail in Femi's coffin. There was no time for a perfect plan, only time for desperate action. The axe, Femi whispered urgently. He pointed to a red fire safety box on the wall inside the server room, visible through the grill. Inside was a gleaming axe. Then he pointed above their heads, at a thick bundle of black, rubber-coated cables running along the ceiling of the secret passage. That's the main network cable for the entire building. If we cut it, he loses connection. The upload will fail. Dr. Adeyemi understood instantly. But it will also crash the main security system. The labyrinth protocol will be disabled. Every door will unlock. He could escape. Better to let him escape than for all of us to die. Femi shot back, his eyes blazing. It was a gamble. A single gamble. Dr. Adeyemi nodded. Doctor, break the grill. He and Femi used all their strength to pry at the edges of the ventilation grill. The metal screeched, a grating sound in the quiet. The man in the server room heard it instantly. He whipped around. He wasn't some scrawny hacker. He was tall, with muscles bulging under his uniform shirt, and a long scar running down his face. His eyes were cold as death. Seeing them, he didn't panic. He pulled a dagger from his belt and charged towards the grill. The grill gave way and fell to the floor with a loud clang. The assassin was right in front of them. He lunged at Femi and Dr. Adeyemi, dagger raised. But just then, a blurred figure darted past them from behind. It was Zainab. In that life or death moment, she had made her choice. She didn't run. She didn't cower in fear. With a defiant scream, she launched herself into the server room. Not at the attacker, but at the laptop, the source of the nightmare. Her suicidal act created an invaluable diversion. The assassin hesitated for a split second, his mind forced to choose between two threats. Femi trying to destroy the infrastructure, or Zainab trying to destroy his weapon. He turned towards Zainab, as she was closer to the primary objective. That split second was all Femi needed. He didn't confront the attacker. He dodged past him, grabbed the fire axe, and with a swing fueled by rage and desperation, he brought it down on the bundle of network cables on the wall. A shower of blue electric sparks erupted. A deafening zap echoed. The fiber optic cables were severed. Instantly, everything changed. All the monitors in the server room went black. The melody of the lullaby cut out. The progress bar on the laptop froze at 98%, before a line of red text appeared. Connection lost. At the same time, the main lights throughout the building went out, and red emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in a ghostly glow. A deafening alarm siren began to wail incessantly from everywhere. They had succeeded. The assassin, realizing he had failed, let out a furious roar. He didn't try to kill anyone anymore. He shoved Zainab hard with one hand, sending her head crashing into the edge of a metal server rack. Then, he bolted out of the server room and disappeared into the now unlocked corridor. Zainab slid to the floor, unconscious, a thin trickle of blood running from her temple. The siren blared. The red light swept over the exhausted, grimy faces of Femi and Dr. Adeyemi. They had averted annihilation, but the nightmare was not over. They were standing in the middle of a chaotic gallery, with an escaped enemy, an unconscious accomplice, and hundreds of panicked guests below. The climax was over, but the battle had just begun. The alarm siren ripped at their eardrums, the red light sweeping over everything like a frantic, artificial heartbeat. For a few seconds, Femi and Dr. Adeyemi just stood there, panting, trying to process what had just happened. They had won, but this victory tasted of ash. Femi was the first to move. He knelt beside Zainab, his trembling hand reaching to check the pulse on her neck. It was there. Faint, but there. The bruise on her temple was starting to swell. Whoever she was, whatever she had done, she was still a human being lying unconscious on the floor. Jide, what's the situation in the main hall? Dr. Adeyemi's voice came over the radio, steady and authoritative amidst the chaos. Panic, sir. Jide's voice replied, mixed with the sound of screaming in the background. The siren and emergency lights are making everyone crazy. The doors are open, they're trying to stampede out. Listen to me, the doctor ordered. Have all security personnel direct guests to evacuate through the south exit. Only that exit. Tell them it's a false alarm due to a major system failure. Emphasize, system failure. Keep them calm, but get them out of here as fast as possible. Once the main hall is empty, call the police. Report an intrusion and assault. He was controlling the narrative, word by word. In his world, truth was a luxury, and the story was a tool for survival. Femi stood up, his eyes fixed on the laptop on the desk. The screen was still lit, displaying the haunting red text, "Connection lost." He had come within a hair's breadth of digital death. Everything he had built, his entire empire, had almost been wiped out by a lullaby. He walked over and slammed the laptop shut. "This is evidence," he said, his voice hard. "He failed, but this thing can tell us who he is and how they operate." When they emerged from the server room, the gallery looked like a city after a storm. Napkins, broken wine glasses, and abandoned handbags were scattered across the floor. The alarm had been silenced, leaving only an eerie quiet and the still flashing red lights. Jide and 2 more security guards ran up to them. "Medics are on their way," Jide reported. "The police too." A few minutes later, as paramedics were carefully placing Zainab on a stretcher, the first police officer arrived. He wasn't in uniform, a man in his 40s, wearing a wrinkled shirt and a perpetually tired expression. But his eyes were not tired. They were sharp and missed nothing. "Inspector Kelechi," he introduced himself, his eyes sweeping the scene. A prestigious gallery in chaos. Tech billionaire Femi Alakija with a torn suit and a face like stone. The venerable art scholar, Dr. Bayo Adeyemi, looking like he'd just been through a war. And a beautiful unconscious woman being carried away. "Looks like you've had quite a busy evening." "We were broken into," Dr. Adeyemi said, choosing his words carefully. "A professional thief. He disabled the security system and attacked Mr. Femi's fiancée when she discovered him." Inspector Kelechi nodded, but his eyes told a different story. He didn't believe a word of it. "A thief," he repeated. "Who decides to break into the server room instead of a vault full of billion-naira items? A rather strange choice." He glanced at Zainab being carried away. "And why did he attack Miss Zainab alone, and not anyone else?" He stepped into the server room, saw the fire axe leaning against the wall and the severed bundle of network cables, spitting copper wires. He turned back, looking directly at Femi and Dr. Adeyemi. "A faulty alarm system, a thief who prefers server rooms to art. And someone used this axe to play lumberjack with an expensive fiber optic system. Your story has too many holes." He paused, his gaze fixed on Femi. "So tell me, who did this?" There was a pause. Dr. Adeyemi was about to speak, about to construct another lie. But Femi cut him off. He was tired of the lies. He took a step forward, facing the inspector. "I did," Femi said, his voice clear and unwavering. "I cut them." Inspector Kelechi raised an eyebrow. He looked from Femi's Armani suit, to his clean hands, to the fire axe, and finally into Femi's defiant eyes. "You did you?" he said, a skeptical smile playing on his lips. "The story gets more and more interesting. Perhaps you should come with me to the station so we can clarify a few details, Mr. Alakaja." He knew he was only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and he was determined to find out what lay beneath. The interrogation room at the Lagos Central Police Station was a stark contrast to the art gallery. 4 thick green walls, a metal table, 2 hard chairs, and air thick with the smell of old coffee and desperation. Femi sat up straight, exhaustion etched deep into his face, but his gaze was steady. Inspector Kelechi sat opposite, flipping through a thin file. The closed laptop lay between them like an unexploded bomb. "So, let me get this straight, Mr. Alakaja," Kelechi said, his voice laced with skepticism. "You want me to believe that a corporate spy, instead of hacking you remotely like a normal person, decided to break into one of the most secure events in the city, run down to the server room and use an axe to—" "Oh, no, you were the one who used the axe. He was there to plant something in my system," Femi replied, sticking to the most plausible story he could devise. "A piece of malware that could have destroyed everything I own. I had no other choice but to physically sever the connection. It was the only way." "A heroic act," Kelechi muttered, with zero conviction. He pointed to the laptop. "So, what's on this?" "I don't know for sure," Femi said honestly. "It could be encrypted, even booby-trapped. But my cybersecurity team is the best. If there's any trace of the attacker's identity or who's behind him, they'll find it. I propose they analyze it, under the supervision of your police." It was a smart move. Femi was showing cooperation while maintaining control over the most crucial piece of evidence. Kelechi was considering the offer when his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and answered, "Yes." He listened, his already grim face growing more serious. "I see. Hold your position. Don't let anyone in, not even family." He hung up and looked at Femi. "That was my man at the hospital. Miss Zainab is awake. And she's panicking." Meanwhile, in a luxurious but cold private hospital room, Dr. Adeyemi was sitting by Zainab's bed. She looked small and frail, her head wrapped in white bandages, an IV drip in her arm. A female police officer stood guard at the door. The terror in Zainab's eyes was no longer an act. It was real. "They'll kill me," she whispered, her voice trembling, when she saw the doctor. "As long as I'm alive, I'm a liability. They'll find a way. They always do." "You're in the safest place in the city," the doctor said gently. "But that safety is only temporary. If you want to live, you have to give us something to fight them with. Not sob stories. A real name. A location." Zainab closed her eyes. The image of the mass murder plot she had almost enabled flashed in her mind, and she knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Her loyalty to the Esu society, built on gratitude and fear, was shattered. "Madam K," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Everyone calls her Madam K. She runs the Lagos branch. A ruthless and intelligent woman. Her cover is a high-fashion boutique on Victoria Island. It's where she meets powerful clients and recruits new girls." That was it, the first real lead. Dr. Adeyemi immediately pulled out his phone. He called Femi, who had just been allowed to leave the interrogation room pending further investigation. "Femi, I have a name. Madam K runs a fashion boutique on Victoria Island." On the other end of the line, Femi, though exhausted, immediately switched into work mode. He was walking and swiping on his phone. "Madam K, not in any business registry. Wait. Victoria Island. Fashion boutique. There's a very famous one. Kimi Couture. The owner is Kemi Adebayo." He paused. "Dr. Kemi Adebayo is a fashion icon. She knows half the government. No one would ever suspect her." Inspector Kelechi, who had followed Femi into the corridor, overheard the name. His expression changed. "Kemi Adebayo?" he asked. Femi nodded. Kelechi let out a long breath. "I know her. She's considered untouchable. Too much power, too many connections." He looked at Femi and, seemingly through the phone, at Dr. Adeyemi. If you're going to take on someone like that, you're going to need more than the testimony of a panicked woman in a hospital. The challenge had been set. They had their first target, but it was a kingpin protected by walls of power and prestige. Femi's penthouse looked more like a command center in an action movie than a home. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the entire Lagos cityscape at night. But no one in the room was paying attention to the view. Dr. Adeyemi stood by, hands clasped behind his back, while Femi sat before a bank of monitors, the attacker's laptop connected to an isolated server system. He was on a video call with his cybersecurity team, the best faces money could buy. "I don't care how long it takes," Femi ordered, his voice ice-cold. "Full forensic analysis. I want to know where this machine has been, what networks it has connected to, and most importantly, I want that audio file and the virus inside it taken apart piece by piece. I want to know how it works." While the tech team got to work, Femi and Dr. Adeyemi began to strategize. Inspector Kalechi had called them. The case was officially classified as corporate espionage. Pressure from above had forced him to stop investigating Femi. But he had said one last thing before hanging up. "I can't help you officially. But if you find something, irrefutable proof, my door is always open." They were on their own. "We can't attack head-on," Dr. Adeyemi said, pacing. "Kemi Adebayo is insulated by power. The police won't touch her with just Zainab's testimony. We need a trap." "How do you trap someone who's untouchable?" Femi asked, rubbing his throbbing temples. "The Esu Society," the doctor said, stopping to look at Femi. "Their power isn't just in violence or technology. Their core strength is exploiting human weakness, greed, ambition, and vanity. They don't break down doors. They knock and wait to be invited in." Femi's phone rang. It was the head of his cybersecurity team. "Sir, we have preliminary results. The laptop's operating system is a ghost, almost untraceable. But we found fragments, deleted communication logs, messages between the user and a recipient codenamed MK." Femi put the call on speaker. "MK? As in Madam K?" "Most likely, sir. The messages talk about the asset, referring to you, and the host, referring to the statue." The engineer paused for a moment. "But this is the most important part. We traced a recurring financial transaction. Large crypto payments being transferred from an offshore account to the parent company that owns Kimi Couture. We have the financial link." Femi and Dr. Adeyemi looked at each other. "We've got her," Femi said, a glint in his eye. And suddenly, a plan formed in his mind. A risky plan. "Doctor," he said, "the Esu Society preys on rising stars. Well then, we'll give them a new star." He explained his idea. He would leak information about a fake tech acquisition, a massive deal that would triple his net worth overnight. He would become the most lucrative target they had ever seen. Then, he would publicly express interest in acquiring a new piece of art, something so rare that Madam K couldn't delegate to a subordinate but would have to come out herself. It was a dangerous gamble, using himself as bait. As they were discussing, Dr. Adeyemi's phone rang. It was the hospital. Zainab had suffered a severe panic attack. He rushed over. He found her sedated, her eyes half closed. But when she saw him, she seemed to use her last ounce of strength to grab his arm. She whispered, her breath ragged. "Madam K, she's not just a dealer. She's a priestess. She truly believes in what she's doing. She believes she's cleansing the world by removing the unworthy." She coughed for a long time, then leaned close to his ear. "Be careful of her eyes. Don't look into her eyes." That final warning sent a chill down Dr. Adeyemi's spine. He returned to the penthouse at dawn. Femi was still there, sleepless. On the main screen was a picture of Kemi Adebayo from a fashion article. She was smiling, a warm and charming smile. But now, knowing the truth, that smile looked grotesque. They weren't just confronting a criminal. They were confronting a fanatic, a high priestess of darkness, hidden behind a veneer of silk and diamonds. Femi's gamble was now infinitely more dangerous. But it was the only way. The hunt was about to begin. A week later, the African financial world was rocked. News that Femi Alakija's tech company was acquiring an Israeli artificial intelligence startup in a $500 million deal hit the front page of every newspaper. Analysts praised it as a genius move. Only Femi and Dr. Adeyemi knew the entire deal was a smokescreen, a play constructed from fake documents and deliberately planted rumors. Femi Alakija, overnight, had become the biggest whale in the ocean. The bait was in the water. Phase 2 of the plan began. Femi publicly announced he was temporarily stepping back from business to pursue his new passion, art. He spread the word that he was searching for a near-mythical treasure, the Eye of Orunmila, an ancient ivory pendant believed to have been lost during the Civil War. An item that only the most powerful, most deeply connected players could possibly find. They didn't have to wait long. 4 days later, a card was delivered to Femi's penthouse. No sender's name, just a single line of elegant handwriting. Lost things always have a way of finding their way to their worthy owners. Included was an encrypted phone number. The trap had its first bite. The meeting was arranged in the presidential suite of the Echo Hotel, a neutral and luxurious fortress. Femi sat on the sofa, a glass of whiskey in hand, playing the part of a young, arrogant billionaire who had it all. In his ear was a micro earpiece, connected directly to the next room. In the adjacent room, Dr. Adeyemi and Inspector Kelechi sat before a bank of monitors, watching and listening to everything through hidden cameras and microphones. A small team of plainclothes special police had blended in with the hotel staff. The door opened, and Madam K, or Kemi Adebayo, entered. She was even more impressive in person. A woman in her 50s, dressed in a pristine white gown, with exquisite diamond jewelry. She didn't walk, she glided, carrying an aura of power and perfectly concealed danger. Mr. Alakija, she smiled, her voice as smooth as silk. It's an honor. The honor is all mine, madam, Femi replied, standing to shake her hand. They talked about art, about legacy, about leaving a mark on the world. Her words were full of innuendo, of praise for Femi's ambition. She was testing him, probing to see how deep his greed ran. Femi remembered Zainab's warning. He deliberately avoided looking directly into her eyes, dark, deep pools that seemed capable of draining a person's will. Finally, Madam K's assistant brought in an ebony box. She opened it herself. Inside, on a bed of red velvet, was the Eye of Orunmila. It was, of course, a fake, a perfect replica crafted by a friend of Dr. Adeyemi. It's perfect, Femi said, picking up the piece to admire it. He placed it on the table and looked at Madam K. This was the moment. Its perfection reminds me of the river goddess's lament. Another piece I almost owned. A pity it's now sealed as evidence in a police case. He paused, watching her reaction. There was none. Her face remained serene. Femi continued. The attacker left behind a laptop. A very interesting item. Inspector Kelechi tells me his tech team found some interesting things. Cryptocurrency transactions. Sent to a parent company behind some fashion boutique. He had laid his cards on the table. Madam K's smile didn't change, but her eyes did. They grew cold, emotionless. She knew she had been trapped, but she showed no fear. Mr. Alakija, do you really think numbers on a server can defeat a faith? It was a confession, an arrogant confession. In the next room, Kelechi nodded to his men. A faith? Femi repeated. That's right, Madam K said, leaning back in her chair, completely at ease. This world is full of the undeserving rich. Those who acquired their wealth through luck, not strength. We in the Esu society are not thieves, we are janitors. We restore balance. You were chosen, but you proved yourself too weak. By surviving? Femi asked. By asking for help, she replied, her voice dripping with contempt. That was all Kelechi needed. Go! He ordered into his radio. The suite doors burst open. Police stormed in from all sides. Madam K didn't flinch. She just sighed, a sigh of disappointment. As they handcuffed her, she looked directly at Femi, and this time he didn't look away. He looked straight into those dark eyes, and he didn't see hatred, only a cold emptiness. "This isn't over, little boy," she whispered, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "The Esu Society is an idea, and an idea cannot be arrested." She was led away, leaving Femi and Dr. Adeyemi standing in the silent presidential suite. They had won the battle, but her final words still hung in the air, a warning that the war between order and chaos, between creation and destruction, would never truly be over. 1 month later, the Adeyemi Gallery was once again open to the public. There were no lavish parties, no glamorous gowns, just the solemn quiet and the soft footsteps of art lovers. Dr. Adeyemi and Femi Alakija were standing before an empty marble pedestal. It was where the river goddess's lament had once stood. Now, it was just an empty space, a silent reminder of the nightmare that had passed. "Inspector Kalechi called me this morning," Femi said, breaking the silence. "She and her entire Lagos network have been convicted. Zainab's testimony, combined with the laptop data, made for an airtight case. He got a promotion. Justice sometimes finds its way," Dr. Adeyemi replied, a slight smile on his lips. "And the statue, sealed in a federal evidence locker," Femi said. "It will never see the light of day again. Perhaps that's for the best." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the empty space. Femi had changed. The brash, vibrant arrogance of youth had been replaced by a calmer, deeper gravitas. He was no longer the blind tech prince. He had looked into the abyss, and it had changed him forever. "I sold 30% of my company's shares," Femi said suddenly. Dr. Adeyemi turned to look at him, surprised. "I'm not giving up on tech," Femi explained. "But I realized I built a very tall tower and forgot to build the foundation. I was so busy creating value that I forgot about meaning." He turned to his mentor. "I'm starting a fund. The Alakija Fund for Young Artists. We'll use it to find and finance young talent in Nigeria, so they can create without having to sell their souls to anyone or any society." This was how he would fight. Not with axes or lines of code, but with creation and hope. He would fight Madam K's idea with a better one. "That is a legacy worth building," Dr. Adeyemi said, his voice full of pride. "What about Zainab?" Femi asked softly, the question he had always wanted to ask. "She cooperated fully. Her testimony was the key," the doctor answered. "In exchange, she was placed in the Witness Protection Program. A new identity, a new life, somewhere very far away. No past." He placed a hand on Femi's shoulder. She was given a chance to create a real person for herself, instead of playing a role. Femi nodded. There was no anger, no regret, just a sad acceptance. His love had been an illusion, but the pain it left was real, and the lesson it taught was priceless. Dr. Adeyemi looked around his gallery, where the artworks were telling their stories to kindred spirits. "She was wrong, Femi," he said. "An idea cannot be arrested, but it can be defeated. They use art to destroy. We will use it to build. They sow deceit. We will spread truth." He patted Femi on the shoulder. "That is how we win." Femi looked up. His gaze was no longer on the empty pedestal. Instead, he looked at a newly hung painting on the wall, a work full of vibrant color and life by a young, unknown artist. He looked at it for a long time, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't just seeing colors and shapes, he was listening to the story of joy, of hardship, and of hope that the artist had poured into every brushstroke. And Femi smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile. The light had returned to the gallery,